New Zealand, the politicisation of immigration. Written on January the 1st, 2003 by Richard Bedford. Contemporary issues. The politicisation of immigration has contributed to a growing ambivalence about immigration and its contribution to the development of New Zealand's society and economy. Briefing papers prepared for the recently re-elected Labour government signal a number of concerns about current levels of immigration in general and the impact of immigration on Auckland's society and economy in particular. Minister of Immigration Leanne Dalziel has indicated that several aspects of the current policy, in addition to the level of English required by prospective residents, will be reviewed over the next few months. Notwithstanding this ambivalence, there seems to be a clear recognition and acceptance that New Zealand society is going to become more diverse in terms of ethnic and cultural groups over the next 20 years. Immigration will play a major part in this diversification of communities, especially immigration from countries in Asia. Fortunately, there seems to be a broad consensus among the main political parties as well as many of the minor ones that this is not something to be feared or resisted at all costs. In this regard, there appears to be some consensus of party view, excluding the position adopted by New Zealand First, that continued immigration at or above present levels will produce positive outcomes for the country's economy and society.
Thank you for coming and speaking to us. Starting with a view that one way to fix this, of course, might be a change of government in New Zealand. I'd like to ask you two questions in relation to that possibility. The first one relates to the ACT Party, which is sitting on 10 seats now. Which means, therefore, it could just disappear, but there's a good chance that it could be around for a long time and will form part of the government, and where that would fit with the Nationals. The other thing I want to ask you about is Winston Peters, because he's still hanging around like a bad smell. He handed the government of New Zealand to Jacinda Ardern when the National Party was sitting on 46 or 58 seats out of. It needed 61 to govern, and they got 58, but he handed the government to her. So I'd like you to comment on both of those two things, please.
Okay, let's start with Winston Peters. So the most positive things you can say about Winston Peters is he was very good on foreign policy. I was always astonished, actually, that you can have a decent conversation with Winston on basically everything that happens outside New Zealand. When it comes to New Zealand affairs, he's a disaster. The other thing you can say about Winston is, I think John Key phrased this quite nicely at one of our events, but I probably won't be able to quote it properly. It's a bit like trying to kill a zombie or a Dracula or something like that. You need probably a kind of a dagger between the eyes or between a heart and a silver bullet and whatever, and then he's still not dead. So with Winston Peters, it's a bit like that. So he is, I think in Australian context, I think you'd probably call this a cockroach who will never die in an atomic war or something like that, except I wouldn't want to compare him with a cockroach. So Winston Peters, you can never write him off. At the moment he looks like he might not come back, but we've been there before. Even when he polls 2% a year before an election, he's a bloody good campaigner. So I wouldn't write him off. He could come back. And yes, what he did in 2017 is probably not what he expected. And I actually think the person most unhappy about the decision is Winston Peters himself, because now he gets everything he always fought against. He fought against the kind of Maorification of politics. He is the greatest campaigner against these issues, but he enabled them. So whether the New Zealand public has forgotten that, whether they will reward him actually with coming back, who knows. ACT is actually a very serious political force. It is a force to be reckoned with. I think they have the standout politician in the current parliament in their leader, David Seymour, who is doing a stellar job bringing the party actually from a party of one, just himself, after 2014 to now 10 MPs. They also, I think, are the most interesting party when it comes to policy formulation. They're curious, they are interesting, they come up with interesting, novel ideas. The other thing about David Seymour is he led a party that expected to win maybe 1, perhaps 2 seats. He has got 10 MPs. He managed to get his 10 MPs for this term without a scandal, without anyone tripping up. So I give enormous credit to David Seymour. He is absolutely astonishing in what he's doing. What will happen after the election next year? Well, it depends on the outcome. If he gets 8, 9, 10%, and he will be a coalition partner, and National needs him, then I think he should have a lot more leeway than probably even David Seymour realizes. Because I come from a country that has been operating under MMP for more than 70 years. The smaller coalition partners, typically, they have the first choice of ministry after the head of government. So if David Seymour plays this right after the next election and basically says, well, I only have 10% and you have 40, but you know what, without me you wouldn't be prime minister and I want to be minister of finance, I want to see the national leader that says no. Because in the end, it's the tail wagging the dog, typically under MMP, and I think we will get to that with ACT and National eventually.
This is his last chance to make everything that he's worked for over these 40 years mean something. It's going to begin tonight, but if this government is not successful, if it does not last for 3 years, it will not have been worth it, the time he has devoted to politics. So this is a very, very important beginning for Winston Peters.
New Zealand first voted out of Parliament in 2008 on an election night in 2008, and it was ignominious, and they were tossed out. It's not over yet, he said. We'll reorganise ourselves in the next few months and we'll see what 2011 might hold for all of us. You're right, Matthew Hooson, he doesn't have an overwhelming successful track record in government, but by God, he is a redoubtable, singular, tenacious, opportunistic and extraordinary politician. And ladies and gentlemen, we are watching now as he walks into the Beehive Theatrette. He is surrounded by media. Patrick Gower from News Hub is asking him questions as he talks. He is not, of course, answering them because he will not be robbed of this extraordinary set-piece occasion.
Can I just say, far too many New Zealanders have come to view today's capitalism not as their friend but as their foe. And they are not all wrong. That is why we believe that capitalism must regain its human face. That perception has influenced deeply New Zealand First negotiations. We had a choice to make, whether it was either with National or Labour, for a modified status quo or for change. In our negotiations, both National and Labour were presented with that opportunity, working together, cooperating together for New Zealand. That's why in the end we chose a coalition government of New Zealand First with the New Zealand Labour Party. Thank you very much. Any questions?
Mr. P. What was the key difference between the National and the Labour offers that made it for you?
Well, I can't talk for all of my caucus colleagues. You can only try and summate or précis what their comments would have been. But all around the country, people felt that we could and should be doing far better, that there are far too many people living in degraded and poor circumstances in this country, and that too many people in the power structure of New Zealand are simply out of touch. That was the biggest thing that changed, I think, my caucus, and by the looks of it, my board as well.
What changes do you expect in housing?
Well, first of all, I'd expect there to be fewer people coming here so that we can begin to handle the demand side, and that we start building 10,000 affordable homes per year. And affordable homes is what we're talking about, which we clarified in the negotiations, that New Zealanders can hope to get on the rung of home ownership as first homeowners far more than has been the case in recent times.
And how much of a reduction in migration do you expect?
Pardon?
How much of a reduction in migration do you expect?
I think any forward forecast would see that, and Treasury's been announcing that for a long time, except it's never come to fruition. They've been saying it ad infinitum. Maybe it's a palliative to those of us who are concerned about it. But we mean to ensure that we have a much more accurate and certain immigration stream of skills and excellence and genuine export education. I think the Prime Minister could say more about that, but that's the two things, those are two things we agreed upon, and that should have a profound effect on change. I don't think it's going to have any concern for the people out in parts of New Zealand who desperately need skilled workers, but it's the massive number that were coming who are not skilled that concerned us.
This is from Campbell Live after the 2014 election. John Campbell, what do you want to be remembered for? John Key. Going back to that main point, I think it was Muldoon who famously said, "I want to leave the country in no worse condition than I found it." Isn't that a low ambition? Yes, I want to leave the country in better condition than I found it, and if there's something I genuinely believe, it would be lifting our confidence to a certain degree about how we see ourselves in the world and what we think we are capable of achieving. Now, I think individually there is masses of ambition that sits out there, but can we actually take that and convert that to take the opportunity? And I always thought what was happening in the oppositional politics, of course, they would oppose national. That's their job, actually, apart from everything else. But was a bit negative about our place in the world. So we played a bit about whether people coming here was a good or bad thing, whether people should invest here was a good or bad thing, or whether we have a trade agreement with parts of Asia was a good or bad thing. But actually, in my mind, the reason that I want to say yes to those things is because they are the opportunities that reflect our opportunities to both get wealthier, which is all about what you can do with that money, and then ultimately the opportunities for Kiwis. I'd like New Zealanders to feel, after my time as Prime Minister, they have become more confident, outward-looking nation, more multicultural.
We are going to rip into some advice now, and I'm really keen to learn more about your business, how you started out, and to find out what you've learnt along the way. I know your business partners. I know a little bit about property, but you're the one that's really taken that risk, and starting a business. So you founded MTK Capital, didn't you, in 2019?
Yep.
And the last year has seen the launch of Stonewood Quay.
Yeah.
So talk to me, mate. I mean, what made you start your own property business, really, 3 years ago?
Yeah, well, so Dad and I were having quite a funny discussion. This is probably 5 years ago. And we were like, what are the three kind of ways that you build massive wealth? You know, not just you have a good income and that kind of, you know, how do you get super rich? And we kind of settled upon these three ideas. So idea one was that you had to have like a natural skill. You know, so you're good at like basketball like LeBron, or you're a singer like Adele, or, you know, and as you know, Dad and I can very much not sing. We are terrible.
No singing.
Yeah, no.
Or for him, dancing.
Dancing, exactly. Any of those things we kind of didn't tick. So kind of ruled that out. Then the next one was you have to start a business. Mm-hmm. So be like entrepreneurial, you know, set up like a Facebook or, you know, a clothing label, something like that. So again, we thought that's like a really cool idea, but didn't really have the kind of that $1 million idea at that point in time. So then the final way that we thought that you could, you know, build that massive wealth is through property. And so, I mean, obviously we're missing out a few things like, you know, if you own like an oil field or things like that, but that kind of stuff you're born into a little bit. Yeah. So we kind of ruled that this is stuff that we felt you could control. So the third one, as we said, that we decided was property. Yeah. And so he kind of came to me and said, I want you to come up with an idea of how we could sort a business that could become intergenerational.
Nice.
And so the RMA at that point had just changed. And so that allowed developers to do a little bit more. Yeah. And so I kind of, through a friend, stumbled upon the idea of relocatables. And so where this was like a really cool idea was, obviously now like I'm doing lots of units.
I mean, I just think if you get to the question of migration, I'm pro-migration, right? So the reason I'm pro-migration is, firstly, if you just say we can't handle more people, you know, kind of Winston's argument, you remember him. If if you go back to that argument, that is just nonsense, isn't it? I mean, honestly, we've got the geographical footprint of Great Britain, and last time I looked, they've got 65 million people or something, all of them with COVID from what I can see at the moment. But anyway, the basic argument is they have a lot of people. So essentially, we can handle more people. What people don't like about migration is not that someone looks different from them or sounds different from them. That's not really the driver. What the issue is, they think that migration will reduce their standard of living. They think they'll be in a traffic jam longer, they won't get their kid in the local school, they won't get grandma into the hospital. So if you want to have a sustainable long-term migration policy, you actually have to build the infrastructure that supports that. And you probably do have to change a bit of your, intensification of where you live and different sorts of things that you do.
Wake up to find your neighbour building a 3-storey house next to your place and there's nothing you can do about it? A new bill meant to make it easier and faster to build the homes we need is being labelled a disaster by urban planners.
I'm joined here.
In a rare moment of political unity, National and the government have joined forces on a bill they hope will see up to 100,000 new homes built over the next 8 years.
Labor and National are standing together to say an emphatic yes to housing in our backyards.
In Auckland, Hamilton, Tauranga, Christchurch and Wellington, 3-storey homes can now be built almost up to the fence line with no resource consent. Meaning we could be about to get up close and personal with our neighbours.
There is definitely scope for these provisions for some properties to result in a very dramatic loss of sunlight, as to lose almost all direct sunlight in over the entire winter period.
The big issue also is privacy. This will allow houses to be built very, very close front on to other houses on the same site, with, for example, a living room looking into a principal bedroom 4 metres away. Blinds will be drawn, there'll be miserable places to live. There's a risk that it is a disaster on the scale of the leaky home crisis, because if we get a whole lot of poorly designed houses which are very bad to live in, that's not going to work very well for people.
Renters too could be in for a shock.
So if you were renting in a property that had hardly any sun, you could actually find your accommodation cost increase, because you could be paying for more power to make your house a more pleasant place to live in, or else need to wear more jumpers in order to keep you warm.
I live in a land of so different sides, so I can smoke my pipe on my estate.
Matthew Hooton.
As far as I know, neither Bill English nor Phil Goff has ever given a speech telling Aucklanders why a 2.5 million population is a good idea by 2030. And they should if they believe it. And if they don't believe it's a good idea, then they should stop it from happening.
Case study, the unexpected million. The extra million in population added in a space of 15 years up to 2017, that is an increase of either a quarter, or a fifth, depending on which starting point you use, came as a surprise to me, and I suspect to most people, who did not have a policy perspective, on demography, population, migration. It is astonishing to me, that this policy decision to grow New Zealand at this speed, and with almost no adequate preparation, was never debated. That reflects badly on the political class, but also on the relevant public service, and on the universities. I remember no public report or briefing paper, from INZ, and the impact of this new million has hardly been mentioned in the debate on rising house prices. Professor Paul Spoonley is almost the only academic I know who speaks publicly on demographic and migration issues, but I never remember him referring to the sheer numbers or the potential impact on infrastructure, until recently. His main theme has been how stimulating it is, to have so much diversity in New Zealand, and maybe how it may help us overcome workforce deficits, and a decline in birth rate.